You lie there at night, body still, mind still working, running the list, checking the math, holding the weight of things you can't control. And somewhere in that darkness, a question rises you've never let yourself ask out loud. What if some of what's crushing you right now was never actually yours to carry? You call it responsibility. You call it love. You call it being the strong one, the one who has to hold it together, because if you don't, who will? But underneath that belief is an ache your body already knows, the tiredness that sleep can't touch, the guilt that shows up the second you consider putting something down. You've been standing guard over outcomes that were never yours to secure in the first place. So what happens when you finally stop gripping the things God never asked you to hold? There is a kind of tiredness that sleep does not touch. You know the feeling. You lie down at the end of the day, body still, eyes closed, and yet something inside you keeps working. The mind keeps checking, keeps calculating, keeps running through the list of things that still need to be fixed, managed, prevented, saved. You wake up already behind, already carrying yesterday's weight into today, as if rest were something that happens to other people, people whose lives are simpler, whose responsibilities are lighter, whose hearts are not stretched thin across so many outcomes at once. And so the days blur together, not because nothing is happening, but because everything is happening inside you, all the time, whether you asked for it or not. Maybe you have stopped naming this tiredness for what it is. Maybe you call it being responsible. Maybe you call it caring deeply, or being the strong one, or simply doing what needs to be done. Because if you do not do it, who will? There is a quiet, unspoken belief living underneath your daily life, one you may have never said out loud, even to yourself. And it sounds something like this: if I stop holding everything together, it will all fall apart. That belief has become so familiar that it no longer feels like a belief at all. It feels like truth. It feels like maturity. It feels like love. And so you keep gripping, keep pushing, keep carrying, long after your body and your mind have quietly begun to beg you to put some of it down. Here is what makes this kind of exhaustion so hard to notice, let alone name. It rarely looks dramatic. It does not announce itself. It hides inside ordinary things, inside the mental list you run through before you even get out of bed, inside the way your chest tightens when you think about someone you love, making a choice you cannot control, inside the guilt that rises the moment you consider doing nothing for an afternoon, inside the restlessness that shows up even during the quiet moments that were supposed to be restful. You rest your body, but your mind stays on duty, like a guard who never gets relieved, standing watch over outcomes that were never fully yours to secure in the first place. And underneath all of it, there is a question you may not have let yourself ask directly, because asking it feels almost dangerous. Why does life feel so heavy? Not heavy in the sense of hardship, though hardship is real and present too. Heavy in a deeper sense. Heavy the way a weight feels when it has been carried for far too long by someone who was never meant to carry it alone. You have wondered, in your quieter moments, whether this heaviness is simply what faith requires, whether devotion is measured by how much you can bear without breaking, whether love for the people in your life is proven by how much you worry about them, plan for them, try to control the future on their behalf. You have wondered whether letting go, even a little, would make you careless or unfaithful or somehow less committed to the things and people that matter most to you. But there is another question hiding just beneath that one, and it is the question this journey will slowly begin to answer. Is it possible that some of this weight was never meant to be yours? Not because you do not care, not because the people and situations in your life do not matter deeply, but because somewhere along the way, quietly, without ever making a conscious decision to do so, you began to carry things that were never handed to you by God. You began to carry outcomes. You began to carry other people's choices. You began to carry the future itself, as though it were your job to hold it steady, to make sure nothing goes wrong, to prevent every possible pain before it happens. And carrying all of that, day after day, is enough to exhaust anyone, no matter how strong their faith, no matter how good their intentions. This is not a story about someone else's struggle. This is your story, told from the inside, because this is where the real battle has always taken place. Not in dramatic circumstances, but in the quiet, constant tension between what you feel you must do and what is actually yours to do. Between the exhaustion you have accepted as normal and a rest you have quietly convinced yourself you do not deserve or cannot afford or would be irresponsible to take. You have likely never stopped to ask, where the line is, where your responsibility ends, and where something else, something you were never designed to hold, begins. That line has blurred so completely over time that you may not even remember it existing at all. And so here you are, tired in a way that food and sleep and vacations cannot fully reach, because the tiredness is not only physical, it is the tiredness of a soul that has been quietly trying to do work that was never assigned to it. You have been showing up faithfully, exhaustingly, for a role you were never meant to play alone. And somewhere inside you, beneath the guilt and the grip and the constant mental motion, there is a question waiting to be taken seriously for the first time. Not a question about how to manage the weight better, or carry it more efficiently, or push through with more discipline. A deeper question: what if the weight itself was never meant to be carried the way you have been carrying it? What if part of what exhausts you is not devotion at all, but a misunderstanding, one so common, so quietly accepted that almost no one stops to examine it? That misunderstanding is where this journey begins, not with an answer yet, but with an honest look at the gap between what you have believed faith requires of you and what has actually been asked of you all along. Something is not adding up. Something about the way you have been living, gripping tighter, doing more, worrying harder as proof of love, has left you emptied rather than filled, heavy rather than at peace. And before anything can shift, that gap has to be named, not rushed past, not explained away, simply named honestly, so that what comes next can begin to make sense of it. Let's begin by asking a question that sounds simple but rarely gets asked directly. What is actually yours to carry? Not what you have grown accustomed to carrying, not what feels urgent in the moment, not what guilt tells you belongs on your shoulder, but what has genuinely been placed in your hands by God to steward, to act on, to care for with the time and strength you have been given. This is a different question than the one most people live by, because most people, including you, have never drawn a clear line between responsibility and control. The two feel similar. They often wear the same clothes, but they are not the same thing. And confusing them is one of the quietest, most exhausting mistakes a person can make. Responsibility is real, and it matters. You have work to do, decisions to make, people to love well, choices that shape your days. None of that is being dismissed here. But somewhere along the way, responsibility for your own actions quietly expanded into something much larger, an unspoken sense that you are also responsible for outcomes, for how other people respond, for what happens next, for futures that have not even arrived yet. You began to feel accountable, not just for what you do, but for what happens as a result of things entirely outside your hands. And once that shift happens, once responsibility quietly becomes control, there is no longer any edge to the weight you carry. It simply keeps expanding, because control has no natural limit. There is always one more variable to manage, one more outcome to secure, one more possibility to prevent. This is worth sitting with honestly, because it may explain something you have felt for a long time without being able to name it. You have likely noticed that no matter how much you do, it never feels like enough. You handle what is in front of you, and still your mind reaches further toward things you cannot touch, cannot fix, cannot guarantee. That reaching is not weakness. It is what happens when a person has quietly taken on a role too large for any human being to carry. The role of holding outcomes steady in a world that was never designed to be steadied by human effort alone. Scripture speaks often about this distinction, though it is easy to miss if you are only skimming for comfort rather than listening for structure. Throughout the Bible, people are called to obedience, to faithfulness, to doing what is theirs to do with integrity and care. But the results, the timing, the way things unfold, the choices other people make, these are consistently placed in God's hands, not human hands. The invitation has never been to manage the outcome. It has been to be faithful in the moment and to trust the one who holds what comes after. Here is a small but significant shift in understanding, one worth pausing on. If control was never assigned to you, then carrying it has never actually been an act of faithfulness. It has been, without you realizing it, an act of trying to occupy a place that belongs only to God. That is not said to add guilt to an already heavy load. Quite the opposite. It is said to loosen something, because if the weight you have been carrying was never yours to hold in the first place, then putting it down is not neglect. It is not irresponsibility. It is simply putting something back where it belongs. Think for a moment about the specific things that occupy your mind most often. the situations you replay, the people you worry over, the futures you try to control through sheer mental effort. Now ask yourself honestly, how much of that is actually within your power to change through more worry, more control, more mental gripping? Very little of it, if you are honest. You cannot make another person choose differently by worrying about their choices. You cannot secure an outcome that has not happened yet by rehearsing every possible way it could go wrong. You cannot protect the people you love from every future pain by refusing to rest until every variable feels accounted for. And yet, you try, not because you are foolish, but because somewhere along the way, worry began to feel like the only tool available to you, the only way to express how much you care. This is where the question deepens and where it becomes uncomfortable in a useful way. If none of that mental effort actually changes outcomes, why does it feel so necessary? Why does letting go feel like abandoning the people and situations you care about, rather than simply releasing what was never within your control to begin with? There is something underneath that discomfort worth naming honestly, though not fully unpacking yet. It has to do with what worry has quietly come to represent in your mind. Not just concern, but a kind of proof. Proof that you care. Proof that you have not given up. Proof, in some strange way, of your own faithfulness. That connection between worry and love feels so natural that questioning it can feel almost like questioning whether you love the people in your life at all. But is that actually true? Is worry really love? Or has it simply been mistaken for love for so long that the two now feel inseparable? This is the open question this journey is not ready to fully answer yet, but it deserves to be asked honestly, without rushing toward a comfortable resolution. Because if it turns out that worry and love are not the same thing, if it turns out that caring deeply and controlling anxiously are two entirely different postures, then something significant becomes possible. It becomes possible to care just as much, perhaps even more fully, while caring far less. It becomes possible to love the people in your life without believing their futures rest on your ability to worry about them correctly. For now, simply notice the weight you have been assuming was yours. Notice how much of your daily exhaustion comes not from what you are actually doing, but from what you are trying in your mind to control. That noticing is not the end of the journey. It is only the beginning of a much deeper unraveling, one that will ask you to look honestly at a belief you have likely never questioned before, the quiet, deeply held idea that worry somehow is what love requires of you. There is a belief that lives quietly underneath so much of your exhaustion, and it rarely gets spoken out loud because it feels almost sacred. It sounds something like this: if I stop worrying about them, it means I have stopped caring. If I let this go, it means I've given up. Somewhere along the way, worry became the language your heart uses to express love, and because of that, the thought of releasing it feels less like relief and more like betrayal. You are not simply afraid of what might happen if you stop worrying. You are afraid of what it might say about you as a person, as a parent, as a spouse, as a friend, as someone who takes their faith and their relationships seriously. This belief deserves to be looked at honestly, not dismissed, because it did not come from nowhere. Worry often shows up disguised as vigilance, as care, as taking things seriously. When you worry about someone you love, it can feel like you are standing guard over them, staying alert on their behalf, refusing to let your attention slip even for a moment. There is something in that posture that feels responsible, even noble. And so worry gets quietly renamed. It stops being called anxiety and starts being called love. It stops being called fear and starts being called faithfulness. And once that renaming happens, worry becomes almost impossible to release, because releasing it feels like releasing the very thing you believe proves how much you care. But here is a question worth sitting with, honestly. Even if it is uncomfortable, has your worry ever actually changed an outcome? Think back over the nights spent turning a situation over and over in your mind. The mental rehearsals of everything that could go wrong, the anxious attention you have poured into people and circumstances far beyond your control. Did any of that actually shift what happened? Or did it simply cost you sleep, peace, and presence, while the outcome unfolded exactly as it was always going to unfold, shaped by factors entirely outside your reach? This is not asked to minimize your care. It is asked because there is an important difference between love that acts within its actual capacity and worry that exhausts itself trying to control what was never within its capacity to begin with. Scripture offers a strikingly different picture of what faithful love actually looks like. one that stands in quiet contrast to the anxious vigilance you may have mistaken for devotion. Throughout the Bible, love is shown through action within reach, showing up, being present, offering what you actually have to give, speaking truth, extending care, doing the next right thing with the time and strength available to you. Love is never measured by how much someone suffers internally over things they cannot touch. In fact, the invitation given again and again is the opposite: to release anxious thoughts, to trust rather than strive, to care deeply while resting the outcome in hands larger than your own. This is not a minor detail. It reshapes what faithfulness actually looks like. Faithfulness is not the intensity of your mental suffering on someone's behalf. Faithfulness is showing up with what is genuinely yours to give and trusting the rest to God. This is where a quiet but significant shift begins to take shape. If worry does not actually protect the people you love, and if it does not change outcomes no matter how much mental energy you pour into it, then worry is not love expressing itself. Worry is fear, wearing love's clothing because fear needed somewhere respectable to live. And once you see that distinction clearly, something loosens. You do not have to choose between caring and releasing control. You can care deeply and still open your hands because the two were never actually in conflict. The conflict only existed because worry had quietly convinced you it was the price of love. Consider for a moment how much of your mental and emotional energy each day is spent on things you cannot actually influence. A decision someone else is going to make regardless of how much you think about it. A future event whose outcome will unfold independent of how many times you replay it in your mind. A fear about something that has not happened and may never happen at all. Now consider how much of that same energy, if it were released from anxious control, could instead be spent simply being present. Present with the people in front of you. Present in the moment you are actually living in, rather than 100 imagined futures your mind keeps rehearsing. This is not a small shift. It touches nearly everything, because so much of your exhaustion has never come from your actual responsibilities. It has come from the mental weight of trying to secure outcomes that were never yours to secure, using worry as the tool and calling that tool love. And yet, naming this does not immediately dissolve the habit. Recognizing that worry is not love is not the same as knowing how to stop. That is the honest tension sitting underneath everything explored so far. If worry has been the primary way you have expressed care for years, sometimes for as long as you can remember, then simply being told it is not necessary does not automatically produce peace. The habit runs deep. The fear underneath it, the fear that something terrible will happen the moment you stop paying anxious attention, does not disappear just because it has been named. There is a real question left standing here, one that deserves an honest answer rather than a quick platitude. If worry is not trust and it is not love, then what does trust actually look like in daily practice? Not as a comforting phrase, but as something a tired, overextended mind can actually begin to live out. That question is not answered by simply deciding to stop worrying the way one might decide to stop biting their nails. Trust is not the absence of worry achieved through willpower. It is something else entirely. A posture, a daily choice, a different way of relating to what is uncertain, and understanding what that actually looks like, especially for someone who has spent years believing that vigilance equals love, is where this journey turns next. Because if trust is real, and if it is actually possible to care deeply while releasing anxious control, then something has to change in how you relate to your own mind, moment by moment, especially in the moments when letting go feels most unnatural. If worry is not love, and if it does not actually change outcomes no matter how tightly you hold on, then the natural next question is what trust actually looks like in its place. This matters because trust is often talked about as though it were a feeling, a sense of calm that either shows up or does not, something you either have or lack, almost like a personality trait some people were simply born with and others were not. But that understanding of trust sets you up to fail before you even begin, because feelings of calm are not something you can manufacture on command, especially after years of living in a mental posture of vigilance and control. If trust depended on feeling peaceful, most people would never experience it, because life rarely hands out peaceful feelings on schedule. Trust, understood biblically, is not primarily a feeling. It is a choice, made again and again, often while the feelings have not caught up yet. It is the decision to act in a particular direction, toward rest, toward release, toward presence, even while your mind is still generating anxious thoughts in the background. This distinction matters enormously because it means you do not have to wait until you feel calm to begin trusting. You can begin the moment you decide to, regardless of what your emotions are currently doing. Trust is less like a mood and more like a muscle. It is built through repeated use, not through waiting for the right emotional conditions to appear on their own. This reframes something important about surrender, because surrender is often misunderstood as passivity, as doing nothing, stepping back, disengaging from a situation entirely. That misunderstanding is part of why letting go has felt so frightening to you. If surrender means passivity, then surrendering the outcomes you have been gripping so tightly would feel like abandoning your responsibilities altogether, like becoming careless or checked out. But that is not what surrender actually means. Surrender, in its truest sense, is active. It is not the absence of engagement. It is engagement redirected away from anxious control over things outside your reach and toward faithful action within the things actually placed in your hand. Surrender says, I will do what is mine to do, fully and faithfully, and I will release what is not mine to control, trusting it to God rather than trying to hold it together through sheer mental force. This is, in many ways, a harder path than simply continuing to worry, not an easier one. It would be simpler, in a strange way, to keep doing what you have always done, to keep mentally rehearsing every outcome, to keep believing that more anxious attention equals more love, to keep gripping tighter because gripping tighter is at least familiar. Surrender asks something more demanding of you. It asks you to consciously, repeatedly, choose to release your grip on things you have spent years believing depended on you. It asks you to sit with the discomfort of not knowing how something will unfold without filling that discomfort with anxious mental effort. That is not weakness. That is a kind of spiritual strength that looks nothing like the cultural image of strength you may have absorbed over the years. The image of someone who never stops pushing, never lets their guard down, never allows themselves to rest until every possible problem has been accounted for. Here is something worth noticing honestly about that cultural image of strength. It is exhausting by design because it has no natural stopping point. There is always another variable to consider, another outcome to prepare for, another way things could go wrong that has not yet been mentally rehearsed. A strength defined by constant vigilance can never rest, because rest in that framework feels like the moment you finally drop your guard and something goes wrong. But biblical strength looks different. It is not measured by how much a person can carry without breaking. It is measured by how much a person is willing to release into hands more capable than their own. That kind of strength requires humility, because it means acknowledging, honestly, that you were never actually capable of holding everything together through willpower, and worry alone never worked. It only felt like it was working because the anxious effort gave you the illusion of control. This is where a quiet but important shift begins to take shape inside you, even if it does not feel dramatic yet. Trust is not something you either have or do not have. It is something you practice in small moments throughout an ordinary day. It looks like catching a spiraling thought and choosing deliberately not to follow it further down the path of imagined worst-case scenarios. It looks like doing the next faithful thing in front of you, rather than trying to mentally secure every future outcome before you allow yourself to move forward. It looks like releasing a specific worry by name in a moment of quiet honesty and choosing to leave it there rather than picking it back up an hour later out of habit. None of this happens perfectly. Trust, like any muscle, is built through repetition, including the repetition of noticing when you have slipped back into old patterns and gently choosing again to release rather than grip. This daily practiced nature of trust also begins to answer something important about the exhaustion you have been carrying. If trust were a single decision made once and never revisited, it would be simple, but also fragile. One difficult day could undo it entirely. But because trust is a daily practice rather than a one-time event, it becomes something sustainable, something that can grow stronger over time, rather than something you either possess perfectly or lose completely the moment life gets hard. This is good news for someone who has spent years believing that faith required flawless, uninterrupted control. Trust does not require perfection. It requires practice, and practice allows for failure, for slipping back into old patterns, and for beginning again without shame. But naming trust as a daily, practiced choice raises an honest and necessary question, one you may already be feeling the weight of. If trust means releasing what is not yours to control, how do you actually tell the difference in the middle of an ordinary day between what is genuinely your responsibility and what is guilt disguised as duty? Because not everything you carry is imagined weight. Some of it is real. Some of it does belong to you. The difficulty is that after years of blurring the line between responsibility and control, that line can feel almost impossible to locate on your own. Untangling genuine duty from self-imposed guilt is not simple, and it deserves careful, honest attention. Attention this journey will turn toward next. There is a particular kind of guilt that shows up the moment you consider stepping back. Guilt that arrives before you have even done anything wrong, simply because you thought about resting, or saying no, or letting someone else's situation unfold without your intervention. This guilt feels like a warning signal, as though your conscience is alerting you to something important. But guilt and conscience are not always the same thing, and one of the most important distinctions you can learn to make is between guilt that comes from genuinely neglecting something that is yours to do, and guilt that comes from simply not doing something that was never actually your responsibility in the first place. This distinction matters because guilt on its own is not a reliable guide. It can be triggered by real wrongdoing, but it can just as easily be triggered by deeply ingrained patterns that have nothing to do with actual responsibility. Patterns rooted in fear, in the need to feel needed, in a quiet belief that your worth depends on how much you manage to hold together for other people. If you have spent years feeling responsible for outcomes beyond your control, then guilt has likely become an unreliable narrator in your life, sounding the alarm, not only when you have genuinely failed at something, but also whenever you simply stop trying to control something you were never meant to control in the first place. Here is a question worth asking honestly, even though it may be uncomfortable. When guilt rises at the thought of resting, or releasing a worry, or allowing someone else to handle their own situation without your involvement, what is that guilt actually protecting? Often, beneath the surface, it is protecting an unspoken belief that has nothing to do with love and everything to do with fear. The belief that if you are not the one holding things together, nothing will hold. That belief rarely gets examined directly because it feels almost arrogant to say out loud. Nobody wants to admit they have been quietly acting as though the world depends on their constant effort. And yet that belief, left unexamined, is exactly what keeps a person locked into exhausting patterns of control disguised as care. This is worth sitting with gently, without shame, because this pattern rarely comes from arrogance. More often, it comes from fear. Fear of things falling apart, fear of being blamed, fear of not being enough, fear that if you are not indispensable, you are not valuable. Somewhere along the way, being needed became tangled up with being loved. And so the thought of stepping back, even in situations where stepping back would be the healthiest and most faithful choice, begins to feel like risking your own sense of worth. This is not a character flaw to be ashamed of. It is a pattern that developed over time, often for understandable reasons, and it deserves honest attention rather than harsh judgment. Scripture offers a different picture of what genuine obedience and faithfulness actually require, and it stands in quiet contrast to the exhausting self-reliance this pattern produces. The invitation throughout Scripture is never toward becoming indispensable, never toward proving worth through relentless effort, never toward carrying more than a person was designed to carry. The invitation is toward trust, toward doing what is genuinely yours to do, with integrity and care, while resting in the truth that God does not need your anxious control in order to be capable. That last part deserves to be said plainly because it touches something tender. Somewhere underneath the guilt and the gripping, there may be an unspoken belief that God is not quite capable enough on His own, that He needs your worry, your control, your constant vigilance in order for things to actually work out. Said out loud like that, it sounds almost uncomfortable because most people would never consciously claim to believe such a thing about God. And yet, the exhausting patterns of control so many people live inside of only make sense if some version of that belief is quietly operating underneath the surface. This is a significant realization, and it deserves to be received gently rather than as another source of guilt. Recognizing that some of your exhaustion has come from an unspoken assumption that God needs your help to hold things together is not a condemnation. It is an invitation to release something that was never meant to be carried, and to trust more fully in a God who has never actually needed your anxious effort in order to be faithful, capable, and present in the lives of the people you love. So how do you begin to tell the difference, practically, between genuine responsibility and self-imposed guilt? One helpful question to sit with honestly is this: is this something within my actual power to act on today, with the time, resources, and role I genuinely have? Or is this something I am trying to control through mental effort alone, with no real action available to me except worry? Genuine responsibility usually has a next step attached to it, something concrete you can actually do. Self-imposed guilt, by contrast, often has no next step at all. Only more mental rehearsal, more anxious attention, more gripping, with nothing tangible to actually act on. When you notice yourself carrying a weight that has no real action attached to it, only endless mental circling, that is often a sign you are carrying guilt rather than genuine duty. This distinction, once you begin to see it, changes how you move through an ordinary day. It allows you to ask, in specific moments, whether what you are carrying is something you can actually act on, or something you have simply been holding out of habit and fear. And this naturally leads to a deeper question, one that may feel almost forbidden to someone who has spent years believing that faithfulness requires constant effort. If some of what you carry is genuinely not yours, and if guilt is not always a reliable signal, what would it actually look like to rest without guilt? To stop, to release, to trust, and still consider yourself a faithful, devoted person? Is that even permitted for someone who takes their relationship with God seriously? Or does rest quietly disqualify a person from the identity of being responsible, devoted, and dependable? That question deserves a real answer, not a quick reassurance. And it is where this journey turns next. Let's answer that question honestly, because it deserves more than a quick reassurance. Can rest actually be part of a faithful, devoted life? Or does stopping quietly disqualify a person from being seen by themselves or by God as responsible and dependable? The answer found throughout Scripture is not only that rest is permitted, it is that rest was woven into the design of life from the very beginning, offered not as a reward for those who have earned enough exhaustion, but as an act of trust available to anyone willing to receive it. Rest was never meant to be the thing you collapse into once everything else is finished. Because for most people, everything is never finished. There is always one more task, one more worry, one more outcome that is not yet resolved. If rest waits for the to-do list to empty, it will wait forever. This reframes something important. Rest is not the absence of care. Rest is not neglect, and it is not the opposite of faithfulness. Rest, understood rightly, is itself an act of obedience, a way of saying, through your actions rather than just your words, that you trust God enough to stop gripping for a while. This is a difficult thing to actually believe, especially if you have spent years associating your worth with how much you manage to hold together. But consider what it actually communicates when you allow yourself to rest without guilt. It says that you believe the world and the people in it and the outcomes you have been so afraid to release do not depend entirely on your constant vigilance. It says that you trust there is someone capable of holding what you cannot hold every moment of every day. Rest, in this light, is not a break from faith. Rest is faith put into practice. This is where something significant begins to shift quietly beneath the surface of everything explored so far. For a long time, exhaustion may have felt like proof of your devotion, evidence that you were taking your responsibilities seriously, that you cared enough to lose sleep, that you loved deeply enough to worry constantly. But sit with this honestly for a moment. What if that exhaustion was never actually evidence of faithfulness at all? What if, instead, it has quietly been evidence of something else entirely? Evidence that, without ever consciously deciding to, you had been trying to occupy a role that was never meant for you. Not the role of a faithful steward doing what is genuinely theirs to do, but the role of someone attempting to manage outcomes, secure futures, and hold entire situations together through sheer mental force. That role belongs to God. It has always belonged to God, and trying to carry it, no matter how good your intentions, will exhaust anyone, because no human being was built to bear the weight of what only God can hold. This is not a condemnation. It is, in a strange and gentle way, good news, because if your exhaustion has never actually been required by God, if it was never the price of love or the proof of your devotion, then it can be released. Without that release meaning you have failed, or stopped caring, or become irresponsible. It simply means you have finally set down something that was too heavy for you to carry in the first place. Not because you were weak, but because it was never sized for human hands to begin with. Something quiet begins to happen in a person once they truly start to believe this. It does not happen all at once, and it rarely feels dramatic in the moment. It looks like small things. It looks like noticing a spiral of anxious thoughts beginning to form. And instead of following it all the way down the way you always have, pausing and gently setting it back down, it looks like allowing yourself an evening of genuine rest without spending the entire time mentally rehearsing what still needs to be done. It looks like trusting someone else's process, someone else's choices, someone else's timeline without feeling the need to manage it from a distance through worry. None of this happens because you have suddenly stopped caring. It happens because you have begun to separate care from control, and rest from neglect, and faithfulness from anxious effort. There is something almost involuntary about how this shift begins. Once it truly takes root, you do not have to force your hands open through sheer willpower, gritting your teeth and commanding yourself to let go. Something softer happens instead. As you begin to genuinely believe that the weight was never yours to carry alone, your grip starts to loosen on its own, not because you are trying harder to release it, but because you finally understand that there is no longer a reason to hold on so tightly. This is what it means for surrender to become natural rather than forced, not gritting your way through releasing control, but genuinely trusting enough that release starts to feel less like loss and more like relief. This does not mean life suddenly becomes easy, or that every anxious thought disappears the moment you understand this truth intellectually. Old patterns run deep, and they do not vanish overnight simply because they have been named and understood. There will still be moments when guilt rises at the thought of rest, when worry tries to convince you it is the only responsible option, when the old belief that you must hold everything together quietly resurfaces. But something has changed now that was not present before. You have language for what is happening. You can recognize the pattern for what it is, rather than mistaking it for faithfulness. And recognition, even before full transformation, is where real change always begins. What remains now is not more information, but a settling, a quiet resolution of everything that has been explored, brought together into a clear and steady understanding of what it actually means to carry only what is yours and to trust God with everything else. That resolution and the peace that comes with it is where this journey turns next. There is a moment, quiet and unremarkable on the outside, when everything you have walked through so far begins to settle into something you can actually live from, rather than something you simply understand in your mind. It rarely comes as a dramatic breakthrough. More often, it comes as a slow exhale, the kind that happens when a weight you did not fully realize you were holding finally eases, even just a little. And in that moment, the question that opened this entire journey finally begins to find its answer. Why does life feel so heavy? Not because life itself lacks real difficulty, real responsibility, real things worth caring about deeply. Life feels heavy because for a long time, you were carrying far more than what was actually yours to carry. Outcomes, futures, other people's choices, entire situations you were never designed to hold together. Through sheer mental effort and worry, that heaviness was never proof of your love. It was never evidence of your faithfulness. It was quietly and understandably evidence of a misunderstanding. The belief that devotion meant control, that care meant anxious vigilance, that letting go would somehow mean letting down the people and things you value most. That belief made sense, given how deeply it was woven into the way you learned to move through the world. But it was never true, and carrying it has cost you more than you may have realized until now. Here is the truth this entire journey has been quietly building toward, the truth worth returning to whenever the old patterns try to creep back in. You were never meant to carry what only God can hold, not because you are incapable or not strong enough, or somehow less devoted than you thought, but because certain things were simply never sized for human hands. Outcomes, timing, other people's hearts, the unfolding of the future, these belong to God, not because He is withholding trust from you, but because He alone is capable of holding them without breaking under the weight. Your role was never to replace Him in that work. Your role has always been smaller and far more manageable than the role you had quietly taken on. Faithful presence, honest effort within what is genuinely yours, trust extended toward the rest. This does not mean life becomes easier from here. Circumstances do not simply resolve themselves because you have come to understand this truth. People you love may still make choices that concern you. The future may still hold uncertainty you cannot see past. Difficult days will still come, but something fundamental has shifted in how you carry all of it. Instead of gripping alone, exhausting yourself trying to secure what was never yours to secure, you begin to carry life in partnership, doing what is genuinely yours with care and integrity, and releasing the rest into hands far more capable than your own. That shift does not remove the weight of living entirely, but it changes who is carrying the parts you were never meant to hold alone, and that changes everything about how heavy the journey actually feels. This is the quiet transformation this entire journey has been leading toward. Fear gives way, slowly, to trust, not a trust built on certainty about outcomes, but a trust built on the character of the one holding what you have released. Confusion gives way to clarity, the clarity of finally understanding what was actually yours to carry all along and what was never meant to be yours in the first place. And the heaviness that once felt like proof of devotion begins to give way to a settled peace, the kind that does not depend on everything being resolved, but rests instead in the trustworthiness of who is holding what remains unresolved. If any of this has touched something true in you, take a moment before you go to sit with it honestly. Think about what you have been carrying that was never yours to hold alone. Name it, even quietly, in your own mind. And consider gently what it might look like to open your hands just a little, trusting that what you release is not falling, but being held by someone far more capable than you ever needed to be. If this brought you something worth pausing for, consider leaving a comment about what you are learning to release, or which part of this spoke to where you are right now. If you know someone carrying a weight that was never meant to be theirs alone, consider sharing this with them. And if this kind of honest, grounded reflection is something you want more of, subscribing helps this message reach others who are just as tired, just as heavy, and just as ready to finally set something down. You were never meant to carry what only God can hold, and the moment you truly believe that, your hands, at last, begin to open.